Doing good, and I will probably slow down and take things a little bit more slowly and with much less detail. Now, a lot of you have already had that, but I want to point out something to you. The FAA calls classes A, B, C, D, and E, they call them regulatory. And with the exception of the drone questions, I almost never have seen that terminology used in all the other exams that I've taken. So just make a note of yourself that when you see the word regulatory, it means everything but Class G and a couple of restricted, in a couple of areas like the MOA, the warning, the alert, and what we call controlled firing areas. To my knowledge, there are no controlled firing areas on the West Coast. That may be back, for example, where the artillery does a lot of their firing, maybe around the Midwest. But out here on the West Coast, there aren't too many controlled firing areas. So non-regulatory is Class G. That's just like unbounded, right? Class G was all over the United States with few exceptions from the ground at 1,200 feet. So the information for you is where do you find the information that has to do with these classes and the question that you find on the test, and they're called a chart supplement. And when you take the exam at the end of the semester, I'm going to try to give you a chart supplement between, let's say, now maybe and at the end of the week. If I can come up with a couple and make some copies of them, you'll see that a lot of the information is handed to you during the exam, and they'll be in full color. And there'll be charts that you recognize because we've had them here. So in this particular case, you want to remember that chart supplement is a very, very important source of information about airports and airways. For my purposes, all my lifetime in the aviation world, it used to be called the Airport and Airways Facility Directory. They've changed that for some reason or another. They call it Chart Supplement US. Sectional aeronautical charts, you've already seen those. We've had a number of examples of sectional aeronautical charts because we were looking at colors around airports. We were looking for all different classes of airspace, and those sectional charts should be pretty obvious. Then I said, okay, let's take a closer look at San Francisco International and LA International, and those were shown on what is called a terminal aerodrome chart. And the difference between them is the scale. The scale of the sectional chart is 1 mile, 1 inch is equal to 6.86 nautical miles. And on the terminal area chart, it's 3.43 nautical miles for every inch. So it's a better, more detailed look at a place like San Francisco International than it would be on the sectional aeronautical chart. Now, one of the things that they continue to refer to, and you'll see this over the next couple of weeks or months maybe, is they refer to NOTAMs. Notices to airmen. Notices to airmen. Sure. Back to the last slide for a minute or so. And while you're writing that down, I'm going to refer you to notices to airmen is very important because it defines certain things either in the future or next week or immediately. Like all of a sudden a fire breaks out in Dinuba. Immediately there will be a temporary flight restriction around that fire, usually a 30-mile diameter, 15-mile radius around the fire, and all flight except firefighting is prohibited. So the NOTAMs have different categories depending on how severe or how quick you need that information. But it does contain all kinds of information for the air system, including daily operations, momentary operations, weekly and monthly operations. So here are the 5 categories. I would suggest that the FDC NOTAMs is important. That's probably the most important of the NOTAMs. The other ones are not necessarily really critical. Look at pointer NOTAMs points to other NOTAMs, so you don't have to worry about that one. NOTAM D is for distant information, but if you're going to be flying a drone tomorrow, you don't need distant information. A special activity airspace for NOTAMs just simply means that maybe something happened in the particular airspace that you're going to be looking at. But you can get that information. You can get it from the chart supplement, or you can get it by calling a phone number that is available to you at all times, 24 hours a day. And I'll give you that number. I want to copy it down. I don't have it up there, but I want you to copy it down. The phone number that you want for all kinds of weather information. You can get anything, you can ask any question you want to about weather in your specific area, and the answers will be given to you by a live briefer. And the phone number is 1-800-WXBRIEF. The WX is always an abbreviation for weather in aviation. So whenever you see WX, that means weather. Brief, B-R-I-E-F, is a briefer that you will be talking to. And that briefer may or may not be nearby, or may be in Oklahoma City, or maybe in Washington, D.C., you don't know. But they can give you very specific weather information about what's going on here in Reedley. They can give you wind, they can give you altimeter readings, they can give you a chance of weather, they can give you a chance of precipitation. They can give you high-level winds and low-level winds. They can tell you about temporary flight restrictions. They can tell you about military operation areas. They can tell you anything that you ask them, they have an answer for. So the bottom line is, when all else fails, call 1-800-WEATHER-BRIEF. WXBRIEF, weather brief. But if you yourself know that the president's going to visit Reedley Airport anytime soon, that there's probably going to be a TFR around Reedley Airport. Chances are Air Force One can't land there, but you know what I mean. So if you want to know where a TFR is, you can also get online and you can go to tfr.faa.gov. A lot of this is put in there for people who fly drones up to 55 pounds. Big drones, drones with video cameras, and drones with telephoto lenses, and drones with all kinds of recording devices, like Landsat satellite. A lot of drones have devices that will take different frequencies of visible light and infrared light, and it will photograph orchards, for example, because you can tell by different frequencies whether an orchard is healthy or not, whether it's getting enough water or not, whether it's being plagued by a disease or not. And that's given to you by the frequency that you capture by the remote sensors. And then at the bottom, advisory circulars. These advisory circulars come out and they stay out, and they are information that are nice to know, but they're not critical. They're not going to do you any good to go searching for an advisory circular for a tomorrow flight or even a next week flight. It's sort of like a catalog of things that the FAA decides that they're going to write specific information about. Remember, I told you I don't want you to memorize a complex diagram, but you might want to take a look at this just briefly and get a sense that there are certain boundaries to the airspaces, because those questions will likely be on some of the tests that we have, some of the quizzes we'll have, as well as the final exam in December. The reason that Class B airspace, Class Bravo airspace, does not have a top altitude is because it depends on the Class B airport. Remember, Denver already starts out at 5,000 feet. San Francisco starts out at 200 feet or 100 feet. And so they almost always go up to 10,000 feet if they start out near sea level. But if they start out like in Denver or Las Vegas, then of course the top of the Class B airspace is much higher than that. And that's the reason they do not define what's going on here in the top of the Class B. Here. They show Class G going up to 14.5. You can sort of remember that in the back of your mind, but I can tell you one thing. Nothing on the West Coast has Class G going up that high. There may be a small little area in the high Sierra where you might go backpacking, and maybe Class G gets up to 14.5. But for the most part, it goes up to 1,200 feet or 700 feet, and that's it. Then E lays on top of it. And the difference between Class C and Class D, C and D, is that this is a 5-mile radius, this is a 4-mile radius. I have no idea why they decided that. I think it's a little foolish. They should have just agreed that 5 miles is a good number. Let's stick with it between C and D, but that's one of the differences. But don't worry about it. It's not likely to be on any test you'll take. Now, you already know much of this. You already have taken notes twice now on airspace. This is just a review, but I want to point out that over here, two-way communication and ATC clearance required. You absolutely have to get a clearance to enter Class Bravo airspace. Class Charlie, if I call up Fresno Air Terminal and I say, Fresno Air Terminal, Dakota 50 uniform, and he answers me back again, I can immediately go into Class C. He didn't tell me I could, but the minute you establish two-way communication, you're allowed to go into C, not B. In fact, people have been stung because they have been guided by air traffic control, and they got near Class B, and the air traffic control was giving them directions to turn. Still, they went right into B, and they were at fault because they did not hear the words, "You are cleared to enter Class Bravo airspace." So there may be a question. I don't think so, because I don't think you're ever going to get close to Class B unless you get a waiver. And if you get a waiver, you have to know what the requirements are. But in this particular case, in Class B, two-way communication is required. Class C, again, as I just said, all you have to do is talk to somebody, and the minute they recognize who you are, recognize you as an aircraft, boom, you're in. You can go right in. And Class D, Delta, 4 miles from the center, dashed blue lines. We talked about that before, surface from 25 to airport elevation, plus the elevation. Now, when the visibility and the ceiling get down below 3 miles, can you fly a drone? Not without a waiver, right? But the ceiling is another thing. Sometimes the ceiling is only 300 or 400 feet on a foggy day here in Reedley. And so if it's 300 or 400 feet, can you fly it? Yes, you can. Class G. If you're in Class G airspace, 1 mile clear of the clouds, right? Yes, you can. Okay, here we are with Class E and G. The one thing we haven't talked about, but I showed you on a map, and that is called a Victor Airway. Remember we mentioned Victor Airways? They are blue lines that connect VORs. Right. And each one has a little V and a number next to it. So, for example, if I want to fly down to L.A. and take off from Chandler, the people at the radar room at FAT are going to tell me, okay, I want you to intercept Victor 23 and fly south. So it's my responsibility to go find Victor 23, get on it, and fly towards the south. Then I have to do reporting as I go. So there are Victor 23 routes that connect VORs. Once in a while there'll be a slight dogleg in a VOR route, a Victor route, but very rarely. Most of them are straight lines between one VOR and the next one. And the interesting thing is that they are Class E airspace on both sides, from 4 nautical miles on one side to 4 nautical miles in. So a Victor Airway is 8 nautical miles wide all the way down to the top of G. But that's what E is anyway, right? E goes down to the top of G. Okay, so Class G, this is a statement made by the FAA, and it says, airspace within which AT has neither the authority nor the responsibility to exercise control over any aircraft. That's how free it is to be in Class G airspace. By the way, that G stands for Gallagher. You didn't know that, huh? Yeah, it stands for Gallagher. No, it was just an honor they bestowed on me. And if you believe that, I have a bridge for you. But anyway, so we're at 700 AGL to 1200 AGL. The difference is that if it only goes to 700, that means there's an instrument approach at that airport. Rarely does it go from the surface to 14,500, although the FAA likes to show it on a chart. If it was me, I'd ignore it because you can hardly find somewhere on the United States maps where G would ever go up that high. There's almost always an overlying Class E on top of G. Now, there's something called a military training route. I didn't point that out to you this time, and I will later on if we have time. The next lecture, I'll point it out to you. They are kind of darkish gray lines, and they are shown where military jets fly very, very low over the terrain. For example, there are military jets that fly very low over the Owens Valley. There are jets that fly from Bakersfield to Lake Isabella along the canyon done by that river. What's the name of the river? Does anybody remember the name of the river? Pardon? But anyway, there's a big river that comes out of Lake Isabella. Oh, Kern River, the Kern River Canyon. So these guys fly the Kern River Canyon as a military training route, and one of them unfortunately crashed, went into the side of a wall because apparently the jet didn't curve fast enough or something. We don't know what happened. So those are gray solid lines that you'll see not very often. You have to look for them to find them. They're pretty rare. But when they're there, you would expect to see military fighters very low to the ground. Probably much lower than 400 feet AGL, which is the altitude at which you'll be flying drones. And sectional aeronautical charts, we talked about latitude and longitude, and the equator. Some of you did not recognize what the word equator meant. Everybody know what that means now? Equator? It's the line that divides the globe from north to south. This is the equator right here. 0, it's so 90 degrees up and it's 90 degrees down. And the longitude is, they're pie slices. Oh, you hear it. The longitude are pie slices in the globe, if you're looking at the globe from the North Pole down. So none of them are parallel to one another. And there are some questions that say, are the lines of longitude parallel to one another? And the answer is no. They all converge at the poles. And there are 360 of them. There are an infinite number, but they've decided that we'll divide it into 360. In our case, the line of longitude for Fresno is 119 degrees west longitude. That is, we are west from the prime meridian, which is the 0 longitude. And that goes through where? Anybody remember? Jordy? The line of longitude, the prime meridian. Zachary, where does it go through? Pardon? Greenwich, England, right? Greenwich, England. That's why we sometimes have Greenwich Mean Time as an alternative to Pacific Standard Time or Pacific Daylight Time. And latitude, they're all parallel lines. So the difference, I've seen questions that distinguish between the two by one question saying, what are the parallel lines that divide the globe, and what are the non-parallel lines? Well, the parallel lines are latitude, and the non-parallel are longitude. So if you make a little note in your book, that is one of the distinguishing characteristics they always ask on an FAA test. Sure. This is important, so take your time and make sure that you understand it, because I will guarantee you're going to have questions about latitude and longitude on your exam. And I hope to be able to provide that tomorrow or the next day. I will give you sample open book quiz like you had today, but today was closed, but I'll make it an open book quiz, and I will provide you with the kind of supplementary information that is available to you when you take these exams at the end of the semester. They give you a supplement book that has colored photographs of sectional and terminal area charts. And this is probably a good place to stop. It's about 3 o'clock. And tomorrow we'll pick up and we'll start with air traffic patterns. And when we're done with this slide series, we are really doing well with our progress towards the final exam. So everybody, I will have I'll try to have a quiz for you tomorrow or the next day, open book, on the subject that we're handling now, which is a review of airspace.